Hi, my name is Snider, and I am here to interview Lubna, who is a expert in the field of sustainable investing, or at least I consider her to be, as a mentor of mine here in Boston. Become acquainted with her, and I'm participating in a leadership and sustainable investing program that should surely tell you a little bit about. But I'm really excited to hear a little bit about your background and to tell us who you are. Please take it away.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to your audience. My name is Lubna Elia. I have been in the nonprofit sector for 20 years, and over the last 4 years have been working on launching my own nonprofit, the New England Impact Investing Initiative, and I'll tell you more about that later. But I have dedicated my life to the social sector, partly because I spent 8 years of my childhood in Jakarta, Indonesia, where I saw a level of poverty that you don't often see, especially in the US. And from that moment at 16 years old, I decided I really wanted to dedicate my life to improving conditions and opportunities for those who didn't have access to those things. So that's why I've spent so much time in the nonprofit sector, and I'm happy to talk today about sustainable leadership and everything in that context.
Yeah, I consider you a leader. You've proven that in the successes that you've had in your career, and it's clear to me in that I've gotten to know you that your personal values really drive what you're trying to achieve. So we have 5 competencies, as you guys know, around what we're trying to share with you, and our leaders are explaining. And Lumina's thought of some really great points to talk about in each of them. And so we'll go down the list and go through and have a conversation around that. So Lubna, thank you so much for this. And let's talk about the first one, which is around self-awareness. And a lot of the conversations I've been having is like, there's a lot of deep introspection that happens for being a sustainable, responsible leader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in terms of self-awareness, the example I'm going to give is of the work, some work that I did with Root Capital, which is a sustainable, they both make loans and they do advisory work for agricultural producers in developing countries, mainly Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. So I was in charge while I was there of opening the local field offices, and that involved an inter-team effort, a lot of stakeholders, and creating the legal entity and then setting it up for operations. And one piece of feedback I received in that process, because I very much enjoy project management and I think that I'm good at it, and I also became aware that in wanting to manage a project so seamlessly, I can sometimes be so focused on the tasks that I forget to get the inputs of the people behind them and take the pulse a little bit. So I received feedback from both a good friend and someone who was involved in the process that I needed to hit pause to take a minute to hear about people's past experience, people on my interdepartmental team, to hear about their past experiences with some of the things that we were exploring in terms of the local entity, and to hear their perspectives on how I might better tackle the project management, to be more sensitive to the cultural needs, the fact that we were all in different time zones, et cetera. So I really appreciated that, and I took it to heart. And I think it also made me realize that I do tend to charge ahead sometimes, forgetting that I need to pause and take stock of the people who I'm trying to serve and really get their inputs to make the process inclusive and beneficial to everyone. So that was very valuable, and I think that feedback helped me with future efforts, where I would start by really getting to know people involved in the interdisciplinary team and getting to know their past experiences before diving into the project management side.
Yeah, that's really interesting how that has helped to inform your career. But in that moment when you first got that feedback, was it tough? Like, how did you manage that personal or ego that sometimes gets in the way when we get constructive criticisms?
Yeah, I've always been pretty open to feedback. I think that, I guess my parents taught me that when you have a lot of gifts, you should always focus on using them for good. They also, of course, built me up to help me understand that I had a lot of gifts to give. and that you had to understand who you were serving and be humble and receive feedback for the purpose of serving people better. And I think it's easy, especially in, in your early stage career, to develop ego when you get really good at something.
Mm.
And you just think, I'm the expert here, I know how to do it, nobody has to tell me how to do this. And that's when you forget that there are other people in the process with equally valid experiences and perspectives. But over time, I've definitely mellowed on that front and recognized that I have so much to learn from the people involved in any project, including with any III from the fellows. I'm just humbled of who we're serving through that program, and I have a lot to learn from them.
Really cool. And I think that dovetails nicely into our second competency on ethics and values, and like how central those values system can play in leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one, I'm going to be purposefully anonymous with these stories because they just touch on sensitive issues in terms of how I refer to people. But in two cases, I had to give the boards of the nonprofit entities I was working for feedback on a particular executive leader. And in one case, it was because of perceived harassment. People felt uncomfortable by certain comments and actions of this leader. And I had in both cases, the leaders were my direct supervisor. So that was nerve-wracking enough. But, and in one case, the leader was actually a really great manager. So it was, for me, it was sad to have to give certain feedback, but I had to give it by virtue of the position that I held and the fact that people were coming to me and I couldn't just sweep it under the rug. And in the other instance, it was the executive leader. I don't think they realized they were being disrespectful of people, but there were several instances where people had come forth to complain about treatment. And I think this person was just never made aware of the impact of their actions or how they treated people. So I gave feedback to the board, and of course the board is tasked with passing that feedback on in whatever manner they thought was appropriate. But I think what's hard about both those situations is that I, may have personally liked or respected those leaders for certain reasons. It was nerve-wracking to give feedback to the board about a manager, my manager. But I had to do it by virtue of what was best, both for the broader team and for the organization in the long run.
Yeah, those are really tough conversations to have. And I know how tough it is being in a professional working environment, how those are really touchy subjects. But it seems to me that they are becoming, it's easier to have those conversations now, especially with like Me Too movement becoming really popular here in the United States and people feeling more confident to be able to express that. I'm curious to learn more about, how did you approach that situation with them? Because these were leaders, mentors, your boss. How do you get up enough courage to confront an issue which is so touchy as that in a relationship?
Yeah, I mean, in both cases, I was asked to do it. So, again, it was by virtue of the position I held at the organization. So, it wasn't something that I would have brought it forth of my own accord, and in some cases I did, and that's what started the conversation. But the point is, once they ask you to please bring it to the board, then you can't ignore that, right? You have to prepare that and prepare to give a really balanced view of the situation, because you don't want to villainize anyone. They have to make their own estimation of what is warranted by the situation.
Yeah, you're following through with your responsibilities that you have as part of that, and certain things may supersede, even if you like the person, like you said, you have a duty to complete your job and requirements and for the better of the company or for the people involved. So let's change it up a little bit and talk about stakeholder relations, which is a very interesting and a topic that a lot of people have been talking about, especially around leadership and how we are bringing people to the table, especially within sustainability, which is such an interconnected field. This seems to be a very prevalent one among our interviews. So I'd love to hear from you what your perspectives are.
Yeah, so I think my example is a little mundane, but it speaks to the need to build both the capacity and the kind of the room to act in the
Mhm.
sustainable space. So, I'll give the example of reporting at Root Capital, for example. Root Capital takes both donations and investments, and they on lend the investments to their borrowers, and the donations support more of the public good work. So they have those two, they have many stakeholders to serve, but the donors and investors are among the stakeholders. And of course, everyone who gives you funds wants some method of reporting so that they can monitor the progress of your entity. The investors were more interested in the financial snapshots and also understanding the impact because they knew they were making an investment in an impact-oriented institution. Um, but they had pretty standard requirements in terms of reporting that were pretty easy to comply with because we built the infrastructure to produce financial reports, produce impact reports, et cetera. On the donor side, I think foundations and individual donors can be much more specific and have certain templates for reporting, and that can create a lot of work internally for the team. I remember at one point I was in charge of managing probably up to 100 relationships when Root Capital was much smaller, and I was on the fundraising team. And I spent so much of my time reporting. You know, I probably spent more time reporting than writing grant proposals. And we actually created a whole system in Salesforce to monitor those reports and to make sure they were handed in on time with the right inputs. But we often had conversations with funders from the get-go saying we would really love to streamline reporting requirements for the sake of focusing our resources and our efforts on serving our clients. Here's what we propose. And I think Root Capital now has, you know, best in class reporting in terms of a quarterly performance report that shows everything from financials to, you know, to the loan portfolio to impact stories. And I think they've really made great strides on, even with donors, the bigger donors trying to focus reporting, make reporting feasible for the long run and scalable and not allow it to consume so much of the internal time and resources. So I think, you know, that's just a point on managing many different stakeholders while trying to maintain your time and effort for the work at hand, like for the most important piece of the work, which is the program.
Right, right. I'm learning a little bit about that process now in dealing with some clients and some work on the side of the reporting requirements that are so important to getting the funding and making sure the project is going, but that they're such a burden even on the organization themselves to complete and put together and provide that data while it's such a vital piece. So it's encouraging to hear a practical way that you were able to like streamline that process and make it easier for your clients, for the people involved, but for yourselves, right? For someone who's interested in process building and what are some practical ways or tools that were used in this that might be useful? I'm thinking like, were you trying to set up regular meetings? You said Salesforce as an excellent tool. I've used that before. I'm curious.
Yeah, so I had customized Salesforce for the previous organization I was with, Design That Matters. And so I brought that knowledge to Root Capital, and I didn't have to customize it myself. I had people who could do that for us, but I helped to shape how it was used in the early days for managing the fundraising relationships and reporting, et cetera. I definitely think it helped us be more timely and accurate with reports, to have everything in one place and to have those things linked to the broader opportunity where we could read about, you know, the funder and the funding, what the money was restricted to, et cetera. So that was useful. I think we had, I have to remember now, you know, we probably had monthly meetings to check in on the fundraising pipeline and the reporting pipeline and who was going to do what. And we would divide up those responsibilities. And I think that worked well. And we also assigned relationship managers, especially as the fundraising team grew, so that you knew who you were responsible for, and then you could manage the workflow accordingly.
Right, right. That relationship building that is very vital to the whole project, not just the project manager, but the relationship manager. Mm-hmm. Awesome. So let's move into our final two competencies. The first one is around change and innovation, and I'm curious to hear your story on this one.
Yeah, so here I would love to talk about NEIII. So that's what we call New England Impact Investing Initiative for short. But the short story is that I have a good friend and mentor who inspired me both in terms of the name and the the, the idea of founding this group back on election day 2016 before we knew the results. And since then, it has been a labor of love, and it's really been my way of, like, the way that I personally am manifesting how I want to shape the world in the future, for my kids, for everyone's kids and the future generations. Um, but when I founded it, one of the things that inspired me was an article by the Beek Center at Georgetown University about the scarcity of accessible education opportunities in the impact investing space. You either have to be a member of a university community or an accredited investor and a member of certain groups to have access to certain conferences, and oftentimes with thousands of dollars. And that's just not affordable for most people. And so those who might have a background in development or might come from a developing country and want to understand the power of impact investing and apply it to their communities don't even know where to begin, and they don't know how to get into the space or how to learn more about the sector. And I had a lot of these people reach out to me on LinkedIn asking for informational interviews, and I thought, I'm not the answer here. There has to be a better way of connecting people in this space. And so I founded NEIII in 2016 as a meetup group. We're almost at 1,000 people in terms of our meetup membership now. And we launched a website, and then we launched NEIII as a nonprofit organization. It became official August 1st, 2018. And that's also when we had the first workshop to conceptualize the fellowship program. So I had this sense, I've always had this passion for, mentorship and helping people achieve their potential. And so that was always an idea from the beginning, that I wanted to have some kind of mentorship or, sponsorship program as part of NEIII. And I mean sponsorship in the sense of, there's mentorship and there's sponsorship, where in sponsorship, it's a mutually beneficial relationship between you and the mentor, because you might have things that they could benefit from, and likewise, but they help sponsor your growth and development as a professional or as an entrepreneur, or whatever you want to be. So we finally, in the midst of the pandemic, had the opportunity to launch the fellowship, and it was because a number of things came together. So the purpose with the fellowship is to democratize access to education about impact investing, for the explicit purpose of diversifying the talent in the sector. Because I think if you go to most impact investing conferences and events, you don't see a lot of people of color, you don't see a lot of people from low-income communities represented, which means that their voices might not be at the table when the impact investing decisions are made. And I think more and more efforts are being made to be inclusive of those voices in impact investing efforts, but that work has to continue. So through the fellowship, you are one of our pilot fellowship members. Congratulations. And you have an incredible class. We have 25 fellows. It is 68% women, 56% people of color from every background, 5 different countries. And we can do it all virtually. They can all participate because we're doing it all virtually by virtue of the pandemic. And that also takes away large expenses in terms of having meeting places and having the hassle of having to get somewhere. So it's made it very affordable to put on the fellowship program. And you've seen the developments, but I think the big wins to date have been that we have, thanks to our network partners and others, been able to get access to SOCAP at a discounted rate, and Impact Entrepreneur, Lori Lane Zucker, the CEO there, has also given us access to his webinars, which are a terrific learning resource. And we have these monthly educational sessions. The official curriculum of the fellowship is that we have monthly educational sessions, followed a week later by a cohort meeting. So the fellows are divided into 4 cohorts that are loosely centered around SDG goals. And they meet to get to know each other and to talk about the educational session content, and then to talk about how to support each other's goals. And we're also planning to mix it up a bit, so fellows get to know fellows in other cohorts, and also just to allow each fellow to present, so that the whole class can get to know who they are and help with their efforts in whatever way possible. So I'm just really happy and proud that it's finally taken off. I think we'll see, the fellowship pilot goes from September through February of next year. So we'll do a satisfaction survey at the end and see what we can improve next time around. But so far it's just a terrific community. We have a Slack network that we're using, and I've come to love Slack. And it's just really great. I think it's going to really help us create a new model for bringing in new talent to the impact investing sector. And it's not just people, it's people who want to work in the sector, but also people who want to become impact investors or work as impact entrepreneurs and attract impact capital to support their work.
Yeah, I am so happy for this program. I'm so happy to be a part of it. I remember hounding you down and Molly and all the other people a couple years ago when I first learned about it and being like, how do I get a part of this program? How do I get to know you all? This is great, because you're right. There's so little opportunity unless you're in the space to learn about it. And so I'm going to pressure you a little bit and be like, since this is a global audience listening, will the next year be a global New England Impact Investing Initiative Fellowship?
I like to keep it that way for two reasons. Because there's no barrier to entry, well, except for a decent internet connection, which we're learning in the midst of the pandemic isn't a freebie or readily available to everyone. But I would like to keep it, as democratic as possible in that sense. And we get such rich perspectives when people from developing countries participate, because they're bringing a whole kind of life and perspective that a lot of people here don't have access to in their, in their kind of closed circles. So I would like to keep it, and it's low cost to do it virtual. There's less that we have to charge for. There's less that we have to fundraise for when it's all virtual. So I really think that it is the wave of the future, and we'll probably keep it virtual to some extent. If there is ever an opportunity for a fellows retreat in person or something to that extent, I'd love to do that, just because I miss having a coffee or a glass of wine and being able to talk in person and seeing body language beyond talking heads. But we'll see what the future brings.
Awesome. Well, that's a great plug for NEIII, and I'm excited to see where it goes. So as we're getting to the end of our time, I'm very excited to talk with you about our last competency, systems thinking.
Yeah, so I think that the best example here is the big tent approach we take at NEIII. So from the get-go, I had questions about, well, are we going to limit our community to only those who define impact investing a certain way, or are a certain type of impact investors? Or is it for only investors, or is it also for anyone who takes interest in the topic? And we've purposely taken the big tent approach, because I think the conversation and the opportunities for collaboration are much richer when you have a big tent and when you invite everyone to the table. So that's the first kind of big tent approach we've taken in terms of our audience at NEIII. I think the second one is that we've been really intentional about, I have been really intentional, for example, as an entrepreneur, of working with other entrepreneurs. So my accountant just started his own accounting practice, and I'm his first client, and I love him, and he's doing terrific work because, he knows I'm his first client. Our webmaster is somebody who was learning, Squarespace and web design, and he's been, again, fantastic at keeping up our website. When we put a call out to our community for board members, advisory board members, and program team members, people came to the table, and there wasn't anyone I said no to. I mean, if there was interest and passion and a desire to do a work, and I could fit a skill set with a particular need we had, then we said yes. And I think you see the benefit of that inclusive approach in the passion that people bring to the work. I have always had a very active board. My advisory board is all in terms of wanting to support our work. Our program team is excited and can't get enough of what's the next thing that I can do for you. I have trouble keeping up with them. But I'm very proud of the team that we've built, and I think it's by virtue of being inclusive that we have benefited from so much energy. And to be honest, since the first meeting of NEIII as a meetup group, and managing also a part-time job while doing NEIII, so I need the help and the support, and this would not exist if I didn't have it. And I think it took on a life of its own by virtue of the passion behind it and who we've
Mm,
attracted to the work. And I would also say that that big tent approach applies also to the fellowship, because I've also had, potential corporate sponsors ask me, well, are you going to have selective criteria for deciding who your fellows are in the future? And I said, well, to date, we haven't had selective criteria. We took anyone who applied to the pilot, and they're a terrific group. And in the future, I would like not to have to select out anyone, but it's going to depend on how many fellows we can manage at a time. And, if I have to create any selection criteria, it'll be focused on, how passionate are you about learning more about this
mhm,
topic? Will you make good use of the learning opportunities here? And what do you want to do with this knowledge? It's not going to be on credentials. It's not going to be on what schools you went to or how much evidence of impact you have on your resume, et cetera. It's really going to be on forward looking. What is your passion and what do you want to do with this knowledge? Um,
mhm.
and we'll build the community and the movement really from there. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it's a great approach. I'm seeing the benefits of it, and it's clearly a way that I think for us to achieve the major goals that we have around climate change, around building a better planet, that we have to build as big a tent as possible.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, Lubna, I think that's a great place to end it on. And I'm sure everyone here really enjoyed the wealth of knowledge and examples you gave us on responsible leadership. Thank you so much for participating in the program.
Well, it's my pleasure, Stephen, and thanks for interviewing me.
Yeah, of course. All right. Have a great day.
All right, take care.